We're through 2 weeks in the NFL season, and you might need to enhance some of your fantasy football teams with some trades. And look, it might not even be your fault. There's a ton of injuries going on in the NFL right now, and you just might have a weak roster because of that. So in this video, we're going to talk about 5 running backs that you should be targeting in trades right now before it's too late. And I want to start with the Bills running back James Cook, who played on Thursday Night Football, and he had a little bit of wonky usage that I saw some people asking me questions about, so I want to be here to, calm your nerves. That's why I'm here. I'm basically your fantasy football therapist and say, it's okay, James Cook is fine, let's discuss. Because in this game, James Cook went from week 1 playing 60% of the snaps, seeing 68% of the rush attempts, to then in week 2, 47% of the snaps, 44% of the rush attempts. Yes, he had a good game, and we'll talk about his performance in a moment here, but is this concerning that the underlying usage is dropping? And I'm here to tell you, no, context needs to be added, and let me add that context. Because James Cook didn't play the final 2 drives of the game when it was a blowout that was 31-10 or something like that. You can see right here, a 7-play drive for 14 yards, and it's Ray Davis getting a carry. It's Ray Davis getting a carry. You keep scrolling, Ray Davis getting a carry, Ray Davis. So Ray Davis is getting all of his usage on these final 2 drives. You can see here on the final drive, a Ray Davis carry, a Ray Davis carry. He gets 6 of his 9 carries, the rookie out of Kentucky, Ray Davis, on those final 2 drives in blowout runs. So basically, it's useless. They're not real carries. So if you would have taken out those garbage time touches for Ray Davis, you would actually seen James Cook see better snap counts and a rush attempt percentage his team's backfield carries in week 2. In fact, he would have played or saw 79% of his team's backfield carries in week 2. So now we're through 2 games here, and James Cook is looking really good. He was kind of a buy low target last week because he only put up 13 fantasy points, even though we know he had a great game of over 100 total yards, was highly involved, just didn't score the touchdown. And then all the touchdowns came on Thursday Night Football in week 2, when on just 12 touches, James Cook goes out there, puts up 95 yards, 3 touchdowns, 28.5 fantasy points, was a top 5 running back, actually I believe top 3 running back on the week for week 2. And yes, I still think that he's somebody you should be buying. Again, you're not going to be able to buy low on him off of a 28-point week. You should have done that last week when we told you, but right now, he is somebody that you can still buy high on. And maybe the most important piece of Cook's success lately is Joe Brady, the new offensive coordinator that took over last year on November 14th. Since Joe Brady took over, here's what Cook has averaged: 19.5 touches per game and 16.5 fantasy points per game. Both of those rank top 5 at the running back position and are pushing close to top 5 overall during that stretch. And now James Cook has a defense, the Buffalo Bills defense, that looks like arguably the best in the NFL through 2 games, and he also has a solid offensive line to work behind, so that's really good trends, right? So obviously you have a good offensive line, it's going to help the running back, but when you have a good defense, you're going to play with leads and you're going to see more carries and have more efficient running lanes. And Cook currently ranks 5th in carries under center, which we like because it allows him to have more opportunities to find holes and pick up some steam hitting the line of scrimmage. So in my opinion, you should be buying James Cook right now because I think this usage is going to hold. I think the offensive line, the offensive system under Joe Brady, and the defense is legit. Buy high on him if you have to. And then I think you should go out there and buy Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is coming off of another solid outing in week 2, and his role could actually get larger right now because of this right here. Tajay Spears hurt his ankle, left the game, did not come back. His head coach, Brian Callahan of the Tennessee Titans, is considering Tajay Spears day-to-day. Now, also, Kenneth Walker last week at this time was considered day-to-day, did not practice all week with his injury, and then did not play in the game, and his status is also in question for week 3. So these day-to-days, we really have to see the practice reports. Is he getting full participations in, limited, or is he not practicing? Those really matter. But in this game, Tony Pollard ends up playing 44 out of 66 snaps. This is via PFF. Tajay Spears, of course, only plays 22 because, yes, he was injured in that game. And then Julius Chestnut, who would be the new backup right now in a deeper league waiver wire ad that we talked about in our RB waivers video, if indeed Tajay Spears was expected to miss some extended period of time, he only sees 1 snap. So obviously they don't trust him, at least within this game. They gave all the usage after that. Once Tajay Spears went down to Tony Pollard, he played 68% of the snaps, and he handled a massive 23 opportunities. That's his carries plus his targets. And these opportunities led to a really good game. 22 total touches on his 23 opportunities. Between his 62 rushing yards, 40 receiving, he goes over 100 total yards. He's actually looking good out there in terms of fantasy or yards per touch and also fantasy points per touch. 15.2 fantasy points. This combined with the fact that Tajay Spears is banged up, and even if Tajay Spears doesn't miss time, which might actually be better for you to get Tony Pollard in a trade, if Spears was definitely missing time, it might be harder to acquire Tony Pollard from that fantasy manager. But now if Spears is just going to play, but play banged up with an ankle injury, that's probably going to lead to less efficiency and touches for him and more for Pollard. You should be buying. So now, according to Fantasy Life, through 2 weeks so far, we're seeing Tony Pollard see 65% of the backfield snaps. He was commanding the workload in week 1, which was sort of a surprise because this was supposed to be a split backfield. 61% of the rush attempts, has even ran the majority of the routes, 47%. Like, the only area right now where you're seeing Tajay Spears see significant work is right here. This LDD is long down and distance. So like passing downs, 60% has gone to Spears, and 2-minute offense, it's been about 50-50. 44% of those snaps have gone to Spears. But this is what you should expect. Spears was a dynamic pass catcher in college. He was dynamic in this role last year for the Titans when indeed Derrick Henry was on the team. So we're kind of already expecting him to have some sort of role in the offense, and this is his role. The long down and distance, at least when he's healthy. But the surprising thing is that Tony Pollard has actually still played more of the 2-minute offense snaps. Now, part of that is because Spears was hurt in this last game, but it was still 50-50 before that, which is going to be very important for fantasy production because in the 2-minute offense, your team is running hurry up. Usually you're trying to check it down if indeed your receivers downfield are covered because you have to run quick. So that's where you see some check down targets. If you watch Monday Night Football, you know that there was a lot of that for guys like Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson, those check down targets, especially in the 2-minute and 4-minute offense. Now, it's not all positive for Pollard. Like right now, his offensive line ranks 26th in the NFL. They have some young players on that offensive line, a top 10 tackle pick in this past year's NFL draft in J.C. Latham. It is only 2 weeks right now, but this was the concern before the season. And overall, the offense currently ranks through 2 weeks 29th in the NFL. And a lot of that is due to Will Levis. He's not playing well right now. And I think that's going to become more evident if it continues moving forward, especially since now Bryce Young is not going to play and he was getting all that media attention of a young player not playing well. So it's not a perfect profile for Tony Pollard because of those things, but it rarely is in the NFL for any player right now. We love the usage we're seeing through 2 weeks for Tony Pollard, and he might see even more now if Spears is limited or banged up in the moving or the upcoming games. So Tony Pollard, in my opinion, is a bot. Now, speaking of trading, everybody always asks me, oh, but who should I trade these players for? Well, that's why I have the trade tool right here, the rest of season rankings that's updated every single week. You can see I'm scrolling through it. This is from last week, so this week's will be dropping later on Wednesday or Thursday every single week. And now here's the deal. This rest of season rankings, the waiver wire tiers and rankings that we showed you in those videos, these tools are just pieces of what I send in the fantasy blueprint every single week. And this is for 150 players, so no matter which league type you're in, all the way up until your trade deadline, you'll know exactly who is going to be the best players you should be targeting in trades, and it's perfectly built in. This is what I use when I send all my trades to understand where the value is and always making sure you get the best deal in that fantasy blueprint. Again, that was last week's version. This week's is about to drop. And if you're not familiar with what the fantasy blueprint is, well, you can just follow these 2 simple steps right here. It's a link in the description below, and if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, it's just a one-time payment when you sign up through one of our 2 partners. It's a one-time payment of $10, and if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I refund you. It's 100% risk-free. That's right. You sign up, you get to use the blueprint all year, you get to the fantasy playoffs, perfect. That's the goal. 99% of people did last year based on nobody reaching out. And if you don't, well, if you're that small 1%, you get your $10 back, no questions asked. So just follow the instructions to get access to your blueprint today to smack around your league mates with. There's a QR code on the screen. I'll let you scan that right here. Give you a second. There's also a link in the description below. Over 15,000 people, almost 20,000 people are using this tool right now, as well as myself. So be sure to grab it. Not now, but right now. The next guy you should be trading for is Kyren Williams of the Rams. They're running back, and this guy's like the lone survivor right now in the Rams offense. I mean, have you seen it? Like the tweet's probably gone around. It's circulating right now. The current Rams injuries, you can just see everybody. Cooper Kupp, possible IR. Puka Nacua, the entire offense. Half of their offensive linemen are on IR right now, are dealing with injuries. It's just insane. This offense is banged up, and at this point, really all they have left is one Matthew Stafford and one Kyren Williams. Now, on one hand, Sean McVay is probably going to scheme in their best available player right now on offense, and that's Kyren Williams. But on the other hand, maybe there's going to be some more stacked fronts that he's going to have to run into, so that's a downside. But I will say that I do trust Sean McVay to still move this offense with Matthew Stafford, the 2 of them down the field in some way, and at least be respectable on offense without Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. The bigger problem for me is their offensive line. Like, they got Rob Havenstein back last week, one of their tackles. Kevin Dotson is still dealing with injury, and if we pull up that tweet from earlier, look at all their offensive line injuries. I mean, this is just insane. A tackle hits the IR. A tackle hits the IR. A tackle hits the IR. A guard/center in Steve Avila, which was a big loss, IR. Jonah Jackson possibly hitting the IR after dealing with an injury in preseason and camp. Looks like he's banged up again. This is my biggest concern. Your offensive line, if that's a concern, we might see what happened with the Rams a couple years ago where Stafford had no time to throw, then he was always banged up and they just looked like crap. So we need that offensive line to get healthy, but as of Kyren, for him specifically, these are all situations why you can buy low on him and you can get your league mate and be like, hey, the whole offensive line is banged up. Give me Kyren Williams. Because Kyren's role right now is elite. 91% of the snaps in week 1, 78% of the rush attempts. Now in week 2, it drops to 79% of the snaps, which is still great, but it is a drop. Why did that drop happen? Well, very similar to what we talked about earlier with James Cook. There was a blowout here. That's why the rookie running back in Blake Corum in this situation saw usage. Because Corum specifically saw 8 carries in this game for 28 yards. But man, oh man, are these the fakest 8 carries you've ever seen. Let me pull up the game script right here. There was 8 plays, an 8-play drive to end the game. You can see right here on ESPN, 8 plays for 28 yards, 4 minutes and 17 seconds. You want to know what those 8 plays were? Yeah, Blake Corum running the ball, Blake Corum up the middle, Blake Corum, and I could literally scroll 4 carries, then the 2-minute warning, 1, 2, 3. All 8 of his carries came on this final drive when the game was a blowout and they were just trying to run out the clock at that point. I think it was like 41-10. So yeah, literally Kyren Williams had 93% of the backfield carries, all but 1 until that final drive. And what did he do with that? Well, he put up a pretty decent performance, all things considered. 16 total touches for over 50 yards and a touchdown in a game where they're getting blown out, in a game where they don't have an offensive line, in a game where they lose Cooper Kupp and basically have nobody left at receiver. He puts up 15.2 fantasy points, but it's not like he put up 20 plus. It's not like he put up 30 plus so far this year like he was doing last season, you can still, I think, buy low on Kyren Williams. And even if you have to pay a little bit, I'm fine with that because he's been that good. And when I say he's been that good, I'm talking about dating back to last year and now this year his role. His role is literally the best in football right now in terms of snap percentage. So go buy Kyren Williams, and then yes, I'm going to recommend buying Jordan Mason. And I know the people in the comments are going to say, haha, this guy's recommending buying Jordan Mason, one of the best running backs in the NFL. Well, maybe not one of the best running backs in the NFL, but at least right now he's a top 5 fantasy running back. I strongly believe that, and he might be top 3. And if you do too, you might think that's pretty crazy to recommend buying Jordan Mason. But yeah, you can buy this guy still. You can pitch that Christian McCaffrey is coming back in 6 weeks. That's a reason why you want Jordan Mason, by the way, in my opinion. Jordan Mason Christian McCaffrey could be out for 6 or more weeks because his Achilles tendonitis started to flare up last week. And if you have Achilles tendonitis, it could lead to an Achilles rupture. Some people on Twitter were saying that it couldn't. It definitely can. And if that's the case for an older running back, relatively older Christian McCaffrey, his career would likely be over. So they're going to give him, I would say, as much time as he needs. And in my opinion, yeah, you should pay high on Jordan Mason if you can right now. Like if you could trade a Travis Etienne, if you could trade something even more, a package of J.K. Dobbins plus another player and get Jordan Mason, because I think for the next 2 months he's going to be the RB1 on this team. And so far, over these last 2 games, he leads the NFL in rush attempts, 2nd in yards. He has multiple touchdowns. He is currently number 1 in missed tackles forced, and that's just the start of it. There's a lot of good things going on here, and let me just talk about a couple more things he's doing. He's top 10 in running back success right now, and he's 7th in carries under center. Like we mentioned earlier, we love our guys getting carries under center. It leads to more play action, more deception, more running lanes that they can see, and they get a head of steam hitting the line. Now, Mason is playing well, but he's also benefiting from the 49ers offensive line through 2 weeks, and especially in week 1, looking very impressive. Like the entire line was a concern besides Trent Williams, and right now it's looking better than expected. So you're getting Jordan Mason with arguably one of the few workhorse roles in the NFL right now. You think about Saquon Barkley, you think about Bijan Robinson, and then literally I'm thinking about Jordan Mason at this point because he's staying on the field in all situations, not just the early downs. He is the goal line back. He is the 2-minute offense. He is the long down and distance. He's doing it all. He's literally doing the Christian McCaffrey role. And that's being reflected in his usage. Look at this right here. Jordan Mason has played 81% of the snaps for his team this year. That is literally only behind the elites of the elites. Bijan Robinson, what do you know, a guy we just talked about, Kyren Williams, and Saquon Barkley. If we sort this on Fantasy Life by his overall carry percentage, only Bijan Robinson has a better role right now on the Falcons on his backfield carries. It's only Bijan Robinson ahead of Jordan Mason. Mason is even ahead of guys like Breece Hall and Kyren Williams. That's how good this role is. He is legitimately a top 5 running back right now for the next 6 to 8 plus weeks. And even when Christian McCaffrey comes back, he's not going to be 100%, maybe until the postseason. It's going to be a 50-50 role, if not 60-40 for Mason. The dude's done everything we wanted. In week 1, he set the 49ers franchise record with 28 carries in a game. He ends up putting up over 150 yards. That's where he pops off, and people are like, oh, I should add this guy in fantasy. Well, we were telling you to draft him literally a month and a half ago, so hopefully you did that. Then this past week, again, 20 plus touches, 100 plus yards, another touchdown. He's not always going to have 20 plus fantasy points, but he's doing it these first 2 weeks, and not the easiest of matchups against Minnesota, and more importantly, week 1 against the Jets defensive line. And it's not like anybody is threatening this guy for touches. Like right now, Isaac Correndo is arguably the backup running back with Deebo Samuel expected to miss some time. Then yeah, sure, Isaac Correndo might actually start to see some more carries, but Correndo, I think, played like 1 or 2 snaps in that last game. It was all Jordan Mason playing nearly 90% of the snaps. And like I mentioned earlier, Christian McCaffrey, even when he does return, if it's 6, if it's 8 weeks from now, and again, Achilles tendonitis is something that can linger for a while and you want to be careful with, I think even once he's back, you're going to probably just see like 50% Christian McCaffrey, 50% Jordan Mason, if not more Jordan Mason during that time as well, until we get closer to the NFL postseason, which for you at that point, your fantasy season is over. That's all you need Jordan Mason for the next 8 to 10 weeks or so. Now, the next guy you should be buying, and again, you probably need to buy high here, but maybe not since he didn't score a touchdown this past week. He actually fumbled the ball into the end zone, is Josh Jacobs, the Packers running back. And this guy, Josh Jacobs, his role right now in the Packers offense is everything his head coach, Matt LaFleur, wanted it to be when they signed him this offseason. You've probably heard by now that the Green Bay Packers just absolutely ran all over the Indianapolis Colts. And look, Jacobs isn't going to have a great matchup against the Colts every week, who, even though the entire arena knew that he was going to run the ball, 32 carries for 151 yards, and the team only passed 14 times, 12 attempts, or 12 completions on 14 attempts. Half of these weren't even to the wide receivers. Even though it was a run-first script that everybody in the arena knew that they were going to run, Josh Jacobs was still efficient enough to average nearly 5 yards per carry on a massive workload. He's been that good right now. The Packers were able to do that because of, yes, the good matchup, but because Jacobs was so consistent and successful in running between the tackles. Now, he had that massive 150-yard game, but he only gets 17 fantasy points. And I say only because it wasn't one of these 20 to 25 plus point games that maybe makes it so you can't trade for him. He did have basically a touchdown that he fumbled through the end zone, which is almost a turning point in that game. So it was a good game overall, and the usage was also great. 67% of the snaps, 65% of the team rush attempts. It doesn't even matter at this point like how many of the rush attempts you're seeing, because you're seeing 32 fucking rush attempts in the game. So that's all that really matters, is you're getting that much volume. And some people might point to the fact that, oh, Josh Jacobs, he didn't get any targets in this game. He had 32 carries. It doesn't matter that he had no targets. The team threw 14 times with the mobile quarterback back there, Malik Willis, who wasn't checking down. He was taking off and scrambling the ball. So yeah, 32 rush attempts. I'm fine if he has no targets in a game where he sees 32 touches. Now, we told you last week to buy Josh Jacobs off of the news that Jordan Love was going to miss some time, and maybe you're the league manager who has Jacobs in your league was a little bit skittish about that. Now you might have to pay a little bit more because Jacobs has one of the best roles in football, and his head coach and play caller, Matt LaFleur, maybe is like the best outside of Kyle Shanahan. They come from the same tree. They're friends. Maybe is the best at scheming up the run game when you're talking about using your tackles, moving both your tackles and guards, using tight ends as well, using motion and end around fakes on almost like 25 to 30% of the plays. There's just so much deception and creativity. It's complex but beautiful, this Packers run game. And once they get their quarterback Jordan Love back, they'll have more sustainable drives. Josh Jacobs will even see some more targets and more touchdown chances. Everything's going to only get better. It's only going to go up. And just to kind of put a pin on this, through 2 games so far, here's what Jacobs has done. He's played 70% of the team's snaps, earned 23.5 carries per game, and seen 100% of the 2-minute offense, which is highly important for check down targets in fantasy. So you're getting this elite role for a running back who is currently second in the NFL in rushing yards over expectation. That's how good he's been. Based on his expected situations, he's still outproducing that at the second highest rate in the league. Now, this next guy's a veteran running back. You probably took him in the 9th or 10th round of your draft, and honestly, he's paying that off and more. But before we get there, nearly 70% of you are not subscribed to this YouTube channel, and I see a whole lot of you have been subscribing lately, so I appreciate that. Here's your urge to subscribe. On this channel, if you find it helpful, if you're still watching to this point, you probably do. The gentleman's agreement is you get help from these videos, you have some fun watching them as well, and the gentleman's agreement, we shake on it right here. You hit the subscribe button because it really helps this channel go a long way. It lets potential advertisers see it and just lets more people see it, which lets me continue to do this as my full-time job. So the gentleman's agreement, hit that subscribe button. There's our handshake for both the ladies and the gentlemen out there. Now, this person I want to talk about, that veteran, is going to be Devin Singletary of the Giants. And look, I know the Giants offense looks gross outside of Malik Neighbors, so I get it. But Devin Singletary's role right now is great. Specifically, he's going from playing the first week 71% of the snaps to week 2 80% of the snaps. Week 1 56% of the rush attempts because there's some quarterback runs in there. 76% in week 2. Not many players right now are seeing 76% of their backfield carries. In fact, this was top 5 in the NFL in week 2, and 80% of the snaps was top 3 in the NFL. That's how good this role is. It's a good role, but the offense is brutal. I get it, fine, but here's the deal. You knew that going into the season with Devin Singletary. Why are you telling me now that the offensive line is a concern, that Daniel Jones stinks? We knew this going into the season. That's why Devin Singletary was like an 8th round or a 9th round fantasy pick. If Daniel Jones was a great quarterback, or the offensive overall situation with the line and the play caller and all that was amazing, then Devin Singletary would have been like a 5th or a 6th round pick, not an 8th or a 9th round pick. This was already baked into his price point. But despite the offense looking bad and the offensive line being shaky, he still had a nice performance. 17 touches, go for 95 yards, scores a touchdown, ends up putting up 15.5 fantasy points. As an 8th round pick, this is the production that most 2nd round picks and even 1st round picks, Jonathan Taylor these days, are putting out there at the running back position. This is completely fine based on where you drafted him. And Singletary currently ranks 2nd in the most carries under center, which again, we've discussed it now 2 or 3 times. This is great for fantasy backs, especially guys like Singletary, to find their holes and hit it between the tackles. And in terms of like where the threats for competition are currently coming from, like Tyron Tracy was the only other running back to see a snap, not only a touch, but a snap in week 2. And you want to know how many snaps he played? He played 20% of the snaps. So basically he played like, 6-7 snaps in that overall game. He's not a threat right now to Devin Singletary. The only threat would be the upcoming schedule. It's not an easy one. The Browns on the road, they get the Giants or the Cowboys at home. And here's the thing though, Cowboys defensive line is great when it comes to pass rush. I don't think that they have the personnel to be a great run stop defense this year. I think there's a lot of concerns at the defensive line. Linval Joseph is a concern on the defensive line. So I actually think the matchup at home against the Cowboys for the run game is a game where Devin Singletary can also benefit. This week against the Browns will be the true test, and maybe he has a down week, but maybe that's when you can buy him instead. If you don't want to buy him right now, I still think he's a buy. And I also want to talk about Jaylen Warren, because last week, and I loved him as a 7th or 8th round pick in fantasy drafts this summer, and a lot of people are like, oh, Sal, he stunk last week. Yeah, well, what were you watching? Let's push up your glasses. Hey, were you watching what was happening, or were you just looking at the box scores? Because we told you going into that week, don't start Jaylen Warren. He's going to be limited by a hamstring. His own head coach kind of said that if you read between the lines. And what happens? Only plays 29% of the snaps. Only sees 5% of the handoffs. And then that's when the DMs are flooded. The comments are coming in. Ha ha ha, Jaylen Warren. Ha ha ha, Jaylen Warren. Take your L on Jaylen Warren. Boys, the man's hamstring hurts. My hamstring got injured 4 months ago and it still hurts. So what's important is in week 2, he actually sees his normal usage, or at least increased usage. 45% of the snaps, he starts to look a lot better out there. And on his touches, he's just vintage Jaylen Warren. 9 carries, 2 receptions. He ends up totaling over 60 total yards between his rushing and his receiving with 19 receiving yards. He's averaging 5.5 yards per touch. Like I said, vintage Jaylen Warren. His usual efficient self is both a rusher and a receiver behind a quality offensive line and a run-first offense. This is what we wanted. He's finally getting back to full health. Now, I will admit, Jaylen Warren still has to compete with Najee Harris, but we knew that when we were drafting Jaylen Warren in the 8th or 9th rounds of drafts, and I still think he's about an 8th or a 9th round value. But the problem now is that he's also competing with Justin Fields, who is going to take off and run instead of check down, who in the red zone is a threat to also score some touchdowns on the ground, which hurts all the running backs here. Justin Fields' 8 rush attempts in week 2 weren't a lot, just 27 yards, didn't do a lot on them, but those 8 rush attempts are 8 times where he could have checked down if he was indeed, let's just say, Russell Wilson, who probably checks down in most of those situations, throws the ball away, takes a sack, whatever it might be, but it just gives more upside to a guy like Jaylen Warren to have, instead of a 2-catch game, a 4 or 5-catch game, and that's when he starts pushing towards 10 plus fantasy points on his down weeks, and he's a flex option. So yeah, I am concerned that Justin Fields is the quarterback. That's not something we were envisioning a month and a half ago when we were drafting Jaylen Warren a lot this summer. We wanted Russell Wilson to be the quarterback, a guy who was targeting his running backs last year often, and maybe, just maybe, that Justin Fields, once he's forced to throw more in games and the Steelers defense isn't keeping them in closer games, then we start to see the Justin Fields that we know. Maybe that happens like we saw in the preseason where he struggled, where he turned the ball over, and we get the guy that the team invested a lot of money into this offseason, or maybe not money as much as just efforts and overall brand, I guess you can say, these coaches' reputations, in Russell Wilson, and that would make things a lot better for Jaylen Warren. Right now, he's a flex option. If we get Russell Wilson back under center, he starts to become that RB2, assuming Najee Harris is still healthy. So again, this is a running back who you took in the 8th or 9th rounds of your drafts. I still think he's about a 9th round value right now based on his current role, even with Justin Fields, but you could probably trade like a 10th or an 11th round pick for him at this point. Like, there's a decent chance you could probably trade Isaiah Likely for Jaylen Warren. I do that in a heartbeat. Take Jaylen Warren. You could probably trade Austin Eckler, who had a decent game this past week, for Jaylen Warren. I do that in a heartbeat. Take advantage of Austin Eckler's name value. So these are the running backs you should be trading for right now in your drafts. The wide receiver video will pop up here once it's out, but for right now, I'll put the waiver wire video just in case there's still some guys out there on your waivers at the running back and receiver position to take advantage of. But for right now, best of luck. I'll see you all in the next one, and hit that subscribe button before you go. Smack around your league mates. Hey, these videos might be a favorite of all time. Why not click them and find out? I don't know. You tell me. You tell me.